I want you to close your eyes for a second.
All right, I am playing along.
Okay, good. So imagine it is Saturday night. The date is November 26, 1966. We are in Elmira, New York.
Oh, wow, okay. Late autumn in upstate New York.
Exactly. The air outside is crisp, probably a little damp with fallen leaves, but you are inside in this warm, dimly lit living room, and the air is just thick with cigarette smoke.
Because, I mean, it is 1966.
Right. It is the 60s. There's the clinking of glasses. It is just this relaxed, totally unscheduled gathering of friends.
It sounds like the setup for a poker night or a dinner party. Just a very typical, mundane American weekend.
It totally feels mundane. But the people in this room, Jane Roberts, her husband Rob, and their friends, the Bernards, they are definitely not playing poker.
No, they are not.
They are sitting there in this heavy anticipation. Because in a moment, Jane Roberts is going to take off her glasses, her voice is going to deepen, the whole rhythm of her speech is going to change, and this personality essence named Seth is going to start speaking through her.
And tonight, let me tell you, Seth is in a mood.
He is so sassy in this one.
He really is. And that mood is honestly what sets this specific recording apart from the others. We are diving deep into session 303 of the early sessions, book 7 of the Seth Material, recorded on November 26, 1966.
Which is such an amazing piece of history to unpack. And just a quick note before we really get into the weeds here, we do need to declare that this podcast is distributed free of charge on all major platforms for educational purposes.
Absolutely.
Our mission today is to do a really deep dive into the factual and philosophical content of this specific session. Because unlike some of the more formal dictated sessions where Seth is essentially just writing a book through Jane, this one
is wildly conversational.
Yes.
It is fast, it is witty, and it swings from these profound cosmic philosophies right into what I can only really describe as a psychic detective thriller.
It is a total wild ride. And just to give you, the listener, the full picture of the chaos happening in that living room, Seth is speaking so quickly and with such complex phrasing that one of the guests, Sarah Bernard...
Right, she was trying to take notes.
Yeah, she's trying to take notes in speed writing, and she literally cannot keep up.
It is so intense that Seth actually has to pause the whole proceeding. He stops his grand monologue and tells everyone to take a break, specifically because he feels bad for Sarah's cramping hand.
I love that detail. It just gives you a real sense of the velocity of the information dropping into that room.
It does. And for anyone who might be new to this kind of deep dive, or maybe just new to the Seth Material in general, we probably should quickly clarify who, or rather what, we are quoting today.
Right, because the setup is unusual.
Very. Seth describes himself as an energy personality essence no longer focused in physical reality.
Which, I mean, is that just a really fancy 1960s way of saying he is a ghost?
Well, he would strongly reject the term ghost.
Why is that?
Because ghost kind of implies this sad remnant of a dead person floating around a house. Seth presents himself as a teacher. He is a multi-dimensional entity who has never actually been Jane Roberts, but he uses her vocal cords to convey these massive ideas about the nature of reality.
And in this session, he is not just lecturing.
No, he is sparring. He is ready to debate.
He really is. And the very first topic on the chopping block is this figure who was becoming just massive in the 1960s counterculture, Meher Baba.
Oh, yes. Meher Baba. You really have to look at the context of 1966 here. The West was just starting its huge love affair with Eastern mysticism.
Right.
And Meher Baba was this Indian spiritual master who famously kept a strict vow of silence for decades. His followers firmly considered him to be an avatar.
Meaning like God in human form.
Essentially, yes.
So naturally, the people in the room, specifically Jean Bernard, they want the inside scoop. They ask Seth, point blank, is this guy the real deal?
And this is where we get our first real taste of Seth's nuance. A lesser thinker or a fake guru might just say, yes, he is holy, or no, he is a complete fraud.
But Seth doesn't either.
Right, he offers a paradox instead.
The exact quote is fascinating. Seth says, he's not who he says he is, nevertheless, he speaks the truth.
Let's really unpack that. He is not who he says he is. Seth is explicitly stating that Meher Baba is not the ultimate avatar, or God incarnate, in the exclusive, unique way that he is claiming to be.
But then he immediately follows it up with, nevertheless, he speaks the truth. That feels so contradictory to me. Like, if someone is lying to me about their core identity, if I walk up to you and tell you I am the King of England,
right,
how can you trust a single other thing I say?
Well, that is the very Western linear mind talking. We tend to think that if the container is flawed, the water inside it must be poisoned. But Seth is suggesting that Meher Baba is genuinely tapping into a real, universal truth. It is just that his ego, or his human interpretation of that massive truth, has labeled it incorrectly.
So he's confused, not malicious.
Exactly. Seth actually calls it an honest deception.
An honest deception.
Of how
I have to say, that sounds a bit like a politician's excuse when they get caught in a lie.
It does. It really does. But think about the psychology of someone who suddenly achieves that level of spiritual expansion. If you tap into this profound, mind-altering sense of oneness, this feeling of infinite love, and you do not have the vocabulary or the psychological framework to process it.
You might just conclude, well, I guess I must be God.
Precisely. You are not lying to deceive other people. You are just misinterpreting your own overwhelming experience. You are deceiving yourself, but honestly.
Okay, so he essentially believes his own press release.
He does. But Seth goes a step further here, and he critiques the very need to make the claim in the first place. He says, and this is a line that should honestly be carved into stone, "He who knows who and what he is need not say so."
Wow. That is just devastatingly simple. He who knows who and what he is need not say so.
It cuts right through the whole concept of the spiritual ego. The argument Seth is making is that true divinity or true enlightenment is just a state of being. It is self-evident. If you have to stand up on a soapbox and shout, "I am the chosen one," or if you demand your followers sign a pledge acknowledging your supreme divinity, you are actually demonstrating a huge lack of understanding.
It is the difference between actually being a king and having to scream, "I am the king," like some insecure character on television.
Like Joffrey in Game of Thrones, exactly. A true king just sits on the throne. His authority is inherent. It does not need a PR campaign.
So Seth is saying that if you truly understood your connection to the universe, you wouldn't feel the need to distinguish yourself as the avatar, floating somewhere high above everyone else.
Right, you would realize everyone is part of that exact same fabric.
Which perfectly brings us to the next big point of contention in that living room. The group starts discussing this whole idea of oneness. And I think this is something a lot of people, a lot of our listeners probably struggle with when they start reading about Eastern philosophy or metaphysics.
The fear of losing the self.
Exactly. There is this deep underlying fear that if we are all one, if we are all just fragments of God, then it doesn't matter anymore. I lose my personality, my identity, it just dissolved into the giant cosmic soup.
It is the fear of total annihilation. And Jean Bernard actually voices this fear in the room. He is trying to figure out how we all fit together in this massive cosmic scheme without just disappearing. And Seth uses this brilliant metaphor to tell them exactly how they do not fit together.
This is hands down one of the funniest lines in the entire session. Seth looks at them and says, "You do not all fit together like a crossword puzzle that any idiot can put together."
The image of the crossword puzzle is just so incredibly specific. Think about how that crossword works. Every single letter has one specific box. It locks in. It is completely rigid.
Yeah.
If you take a piece out, the whole puzzle is broken, and once you are slotted in, you are stuck there forever.
It implies that I am just this jagged little shape waiting to be shoved into a pre-existing hole, and once I find my hole, my purpose is done. I am frozen.
And Seth rejects that concept entirely. He says, we are highly individualized portions of the whole.
But wait, how can we be part of a whole but not fit together like a puzzle? That is the part that trips me up.
Well, because the whole is not a static, finished picture. It is a dynamic, living, breathing system. Try to think of it less like a cardboard puzzle and more like a jazz band.
The jazz band. Okay, I like that.
Right. So in a jazz band, the music being created is the whole, but the saxophone player is doing something totally different from the drummer. They each retain their complete, distinct individuality.
They are improvising.
Exactly. They're expressing their unique soul through their instrument, but the end result creates this beautiful, unified experience. You do not lose yourself in the music. You actually find a much higher expression of yourself within the music.
That is infinitely more comforting than being a rigid puzzle piece. So Seth is reassuring Jane and everyone else that individuality is not some cosmic error. It is not something you are supposed to overcome or erase.
Correct. He really emphasizes that the self is limitless. You do not become less of yourself by expanding your consciousness. You actually become more you. The fear of losing your identity is just a fundamental misunderstanding of what identity actually is.
Okay, so we have established that gurus can be honestly deceptive and that we are definitely not crossword puzzle pieces. Now the conversation in the room shifts directly to Gene himself. Because Gene has this big project. He really wants to start a utopian school.
Right. And you have to remember, in 1966, this was the absolute zeitgeist. Everyone was trying to start a commune or an alternative school or a center for expanded awareness.
The whole hippie movement was gearing up.
Exactly. And Gene is very earnest about this. He desperately wants to create a seminar to teach these exact truths they are learning from Seth. But he is super anxious about it. He feels like he is pushing a massive boulder up a steep hill.
He wants to know who is really running the seminar spiritually, like who is the boss on the other side.
And Seth's answer to that question introduces one of the most complex, really mind-bending concepts in the entire Seth material, the spacious present.
The spacious present. It is a beautiful phrase.
It really is.
But what does it actually mean in practice? Seth tells Gene that he isn't running the seminar alone and that a larger self is actually in charge. But then he immediately pivots and calls Gene a slowpoke.
A slowpoke. It is such a human, playful insult to throw out from the cosmos, but the metaphysical implication behind it is staggering. Seth is telling Gene that the success he is striving so hard for, this utopian school he is stressing over building,
Yeah.
in the spacious present, it has already happened.
Okay, I have to push back on this a little bit because this is where my human brain starts to completely short circuit. If the school already exists and the massive success has already happened, then why is Gene sitting in a living room in Elmira having an anxiety attack about it? Why does he have to do any work at all?
That is the ultimate core question of this philosophy. If the future already exists, why do we have to walk toward it? Seth explains that in the spacious present, all probabilities exist simultaneously.
Okay.
So the version of Gene who has successfully built and opened the school already exists. That reality is firmly established. But the version of Gene sitting in the room in 1966 has simply not yet aligned his frequency or his focus with that specific reality.
So it is kind of like a radio station. The song I want to hear is already playing out there in the airwaves, but my dial is just stuck on the wrong channel.
That is a great analogy. Or let's go back to the idea of walking down a street. Seth says, the recognition has already been made. You have not yet caught up with it, you see.
Right.
Imagine you are walking home from work. Your house already exists. It is warm, the lights are on, dinner is sitting on the stove. The house is completely real, but you are still 2 blocks away. You physically have to walk the remaining 2 blocks.
So the walking itself is the experience of time.
Yes, the walking is the time experience.
But wait, if I just sit down on the sidewalk and stop walking, I never actually get to the house.
Exactly. The potential is there. The reality of the house is anchored in space, but you must traverse the medium of time to physically experience it. Seth's point to Gene is basically, do not worry about whether or not the house exists. It does. Stop stressing over the blueprint and just walk.
It is there for the taking, but you must learn how to take it.
And he adds a very sharp warning to that. He says, for if you try to take it, you lose it.
If you try to take it, you lose it.
That sounds like a Zen koan.
He means if you try to force it with your ego, if you grasp at it out of sheer desperation, or if you try to violently manipulate the timeline because you secretly do not trust that the house is actually there, you create intense resistance. You push the reality away from yourself.
You trip over your own feet while walking down the street.
Exactly. You have to trust that the larger self has already laid the pavement. You just have to walk with steady confidence. So Gene is essentially being told to relax. The project is already a success. You are just the last person to find out about it.
Basically, yes. He is the slowpoke who is just trying to catch up to his own soul's achievement.
Now, if this were just a standard philosophy seminar, we would probably stop right there. We would ponder the simultaneous nature of time, and then we would all go home. But this is the moment where the session takes a very sharp left turn into something distinctly spooky.
Yes. This is where the whole vibe in the room dramatically shifts. The playful banter about slowpokes just drops completely away. Seth suddenly gets very serious and says, give us a moment again, please. These are impressions.
He goes into full psychic detective mode. He stops talking in metaphors and starts reading the actual energy surrounding Gene's business project. And he's giving hard, concrete data.
Which is a crucial distinction. Because skeptics will often argue that mediums only ever speak in these broad, foggy generalizations.
Like, I sense a father figure with a J name, or I see a big change coming your way in the fall.
Right, Barnum statements that could apply to anyone. But Seth does not do that here. He starts listing highly specific details about the literal people involved in Gene's everyday work life. Let's look at the actual list he gives. First, he identifies an older person, around 48 years old, and gives the specific initials D and H.
Okay, initials and an exact age. That is fairly specific.
But then he focuses on a specific active threat to the project. He warns Gene about a 23-year-old male, and he tentatively offers the last name Smith.
A 23-year-old named Smith.
And he describes this Smith character's psychology in detail. He says the young man has overenthusiastic reactions. He notes that there is a dominating mother in the picture. He even randomly mentions a connection to the color brown.
And then comes the big warning. Seth predicts actual legal trouble if this young man remains involved in the school project. And to top it all off, he throws in a geographical clue. He says Miss, which he then interprets as Mississippi. Now just put yourself back in that Elmira living room. You are sipping your drink, you are having a nice chat about the cosmos, and suddenly this disembodied voice cuts through the smoke and says, hey, watch out for the 23-year-old named Smith from Mississippi who has severe mother issues, or you are going to get sued.
It is genuinely chilling, and what is most remarkable about this isn't just the prediction, it is the reaction documented in the session notes. We do not have to wait years to see if any of this was true. Gene Bernard verifies every single piece of it on the spot.
Right then and there.
Yes. Gene immediately confirms there is a Smith currently at his work. He confirms the guy is exactly 23 years old. He has the exact overenthusiastic, somewhat erratic personality Seth described. Gene also confirms the dominating mother dynamic. Seth even alludes to the young man having some feminine characteristics, which Gene validates.
And what about the legal trouble?
Gene entirely agrees that if this specific person were to cause an issue for the project, it would undoubtedly be of a legal nature.
That honestly stops me in my tracks, because you and I can sit here and debate the theory of the spacious present all day long. It is an abstract theory, but Smith, 23, legal trouble, Mississippi, that is cold, hard data.
It grounds all the high-level metaphysics in completely observable reality. It strongly suggests that when Seth is talking about the spacious present, he is not just making up philosophical thought experiments. He is literally looking at a landscape. He can clearly see the potholes in Gene's road.
The road Gene hasn't even walked down yet.
Exactly.
It is like Seth is hovering in a helicopter, looking down at a giant maze, and Gene is just a rat running through the maze. And Seth is shouting down, hey, do not turn left at the next corner, there's a cat waiting for you.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. And notice the ethics of how Seth handles it. He does not intervene to magically stop the trouble. He just offers the information as a tool. It is still entirely up to Gene to navigate the maze.
But it completely validates the earlier point about time. The future exists, the obstacles exist. The legal trouble with Smith is a standing probability that it's just waiting out there to be triggered.
It is a stark reminder that this physical game we are all playing has very real stakes, which naturally leads us to the next segment of the night and another massive cultural touchstone of 1966.
Oh boy. Timothy Leary.
Timothy Leary, the Pied Piper of LSD.
Turn on, tune in, drop out.
Exactly. So Gene asks Seth what he thinks of Leary. Now, remember the context. In 1966, Leary was a literal messiah to a huge chunk of the youth, an absolute public enemy #1 to the establishment. He was telling millions of people that synthetic chemicals were the ultimate shortcut to experiencing God.
So Gene really wants to know, is Leary actually enlightening people? Are these psychedelics truly opening the doors of perception?
And Seth's response is really not what you might expect. He does not clutch his pearls and give a DARE speech about how drugs are evil, but he certainly does not endorse it either. He uses a very specific, slightly mocking visual image. He says Leary leaps like a jackrabbit.
Leaps like a jackrabbit. It suggests this frantic, uncontrolled, jerky motion. A jackrabbit does not soar through the sky. It hops wildly. It is completely erratic.
Right. Seth says there is a certain kind of protection in Leary's chemical method because he, and I quote, flies over chasms he doesn't understand.
Let's really break that down. What exactly is the chasm in this metaphor?
This is such a profound insight into the actual psychology of spiritual expansion. The chasm represents the deep, dark depths of the human psyche. It is our unhealed traumas, our repressions, the collective unconscious.
What Carl Jung would call the shadow self.
Yes, the shadow, the terrifying stuff hidden down in the basement of our minds. Now, the traditional, rigorous path of mysticism involves physically climbing down into that chasm. You have to face your demons in the dark. You navigate the sharp rocks. You build the internal muscles of awareness by struggling, and then you climb up the other side.
It is incredibly slow, painful, hard work. It is earned awareness.
Exactly, earned awareness. And Seth is saying that Leary, and by extension the entire psychedelic method, is basically a giant catapult. You just load yourself in and launch yourself over the massive hole.
So you do get the amazing view from the top. You briefly see the exact same cosmic truth that the meditating mystic sees.
You do. But Seth explicitly notes his wings are not strong wings.
Because he didn't build them himself through the climb.
Exactly. He hasn't done a single ounce of the actual work. Seth argues that Leary is safe only because he is completely ignorant of what he is actually flying over. He has no idea how deep the hole below him is. If he were to look down, or if the drug suddenly wore off mid-flight, or if the trip turned bad while he was hovering over that abyss,
He would plummet.
he would fall straight down, and because he skipped the climb, he wouldn't have the internal psychological structure to catch himself.
That is just a fascinating, incredibly nuanced critique. He is not saying the destination of the LSD trip is fake. The oneness they experience is real. He is saying the vehicle they use to get there is incredibly flimsy and dangerous.
It implies that true, lasting safety in any kind of spiritual exploration comes exclusively from deep self-knowledge. Knowing the true nature of the chasm, knowing yourself. If you try to skip the hard self-work and go straight to cosmic consciousness, you are fragile. You are a panicked jackrabbit in the air, not an eagle.
I just love that we are getting this high-level commentary in 1966, right as the psychedelic wave is hitting its absolute peak. It is incredibly prescient. But Seth is not done with the history lessons. He is done dissecting the present, he has looked at the immediate future with the whole Smith lawsuit, and now he throws the car into reverse, like way into reverse.
Oh yeah, we are going all the way back to the 15th century now. Segment 5, Past Lives.
Now, I know some people listening might immediately roll their eyes at the concept of reincarnation. It is a really hard pill to swallow for the modern secular mind. But the way Seth uses it here is entirely as a practical diagnostic tool. He's using history to explain exactly why Gene is the way he is today.
He is connecting the karmic dots. He starts by describing a specific life for Gene in the 1400s. He says Gene was an Italian or French leather maker. Again, he gives exact dates, 1423 to 1473.
And the details are insane. He doesn't just vaguely say, you were a peasant craftsman. He says you had difficulties with your left ear. You played a bugle-like instrument. You had severe difficulties with a male parent.
It is the level of specificity you would expect from a historical novelist, but the really crucial life, the one that fully explains Gene's current burning obsession with building this utopian school, is the next one he mentions, the 18th century Spanish monk.
This story is literally a movie waiting to be made. A Spanish monk who absolutely hates the strict rules of the stone monastery.
He runs away, he craves absolute freedom, and he craves building a brand new world. So he travels all the way to Africa, and what does he do when he gets there? He gathers this ragtag group of renegade army deserters, 73 people, Seth specifies, and he tries to establish a perfect utopia in the wilderness.
Just picture that. A runaway monk and a bunch of cynical army deserters trying to build heaven on earth in the African bush.
And it ends in absolute disaster. Seth plainly calls the project too ambitious. The entire band of 73 people is wiped out by local tribes. They are all killed. The glorious utopia just becomes a mass graveyard.
That is incredibly heavy. But then Seth drops a citation here that absolutely blew my mind. He calmly claims there is actually a printed book about this specific historical event.
Yes, he casually cites a title, Stolen Lands or Islands by Mission House, Ltd., and he even gives the subtitle, A Recording of Utopias and Their Perhaps Results.
Okay, I have to ask you as the expert here. Does this book actually exist? Can I go buy it on Amazon right now?
That is the great enduring mystery of this session. To my knowledge, it has never been definitively found in any standard historical bibliographies. It is entirely possible it might be some incredibly obscure, out-of-print religious pamphlet from the 19th century sitting in a dusty archive somewhere. Or, if we look at it through Seth's multi-dimensional lens, it might be a book that exists in a probable reality very close to ours, but not in our exact timeline.
But honestly, regardless of whether we can find the physical book today, the psychological point Seth is making is crystal clear. Why is Gene so pathologically obsessed with starting an alternative school in Elmira in 1966?
Because he is desperately trying to fix the devastating mistake of his 18th century life. He failed to build the utopia then. 73 people died because of his hubris. His soul still carries the agonizing weight of that failure. So now he is back in a new body and he has this overwhelming, unexplained urge to do it all again, to finally get it right.
So the school isn't just a fun business idea for him. It is a literal karmic correction.
Exactly. And Seth is explicitly warning him, do not make the exact same mistake this time. Do not be too ambitious. Do not try to forcefully impose a rigid structure onto reality. That was the monk's fatal flaw, pure arrogance and a total lack of practical grounding.
Right.
Seth is telling Jean to let the school grow naturally out of the spacious present. Do not force the utopia to happen on your rigid schedule. Let it organically emerge.
It is honestly incredible how Seth weaves all these seemingly random threads together. The Slowpoke comment, the psychic warning about Smith, the Jackrabbit critique of Larry, the tragic monk story. It is all exactly the same message. Jean, stop rushing.
Yeah.
Stop forcing things. You're going to crash and burn just like you did before. Slow down and trust the process.
It is a masterclass in therapy, really advanced multidimensional therapy.
Which perfectly brings us to the climax of the night, the heavy philosophy. Because Gene, despite getting all this personalized advice, is still really struggling with the underlying logic of the universe. He tries to logically back Seth into a corner.
This is the classic nihilism trap. Jean essentially says, okay, Seth, I hear you. If physical reality is ultimately an illusion, and if we are all already perfectly one, and if the future success of my school has already happened in the spacious present, and if time is just simultaneous anyway, then why are we even here?
Why bother getting out of bed in the morning?
Right. Jean says there is nowhere to actually go and nothing to actually do, so why go through the charade?
It is a completely valid question. If I eventually realize I am just a digital character in a video game, and the game has technically already been beaten by the developers, why should I bother playing the levels?
And Seth's answer is really surprising here. He doesn't scold Jean for being negative. He entirely agrees with the premise. He says, it is indeed a colossal and lovely joke.
A colossal and lovely joke.
But then comes the pivot, the single most important philosophical pivot in the entire session. He tells Jean that the joke is relevant.
Relevant? But how on earth can an illusion be relevant?
Seth's core argument is that you must experience the illusion fully in order to truly understand that it is an illusion. You cannot just intellectually skip to the end screen. You cannot just read a book that says all is one and expect that mental concept to be enough for your soul's evolution. You actually have to feel the painful separation of physical life to truly comprehend the joy of unity.
He says you must be free enough to explore the nature and experience of every living thing and then leave your system.
It goes right back to the video game analogy. You buy the game, you intellectually know the fire-breathing dragons aren't real, you know it is all just lines of code, but you cannot just stare blankly at the start screen forever. The joy, the emotional growth, the adrenaline, the learning, it only comes from actually playing the difficult levels. You have to willingly immerse yourself in the fake world to extract the very real wisdom.
And then they land on this incredibly vivid image. Jean casually mentions the statue of Shiva.
Right, the Hindu deity of destruction and transformation.
Yeah. Shiva is very often depicted joyfully dancing on the crushed body of a dwarf, and the dwarf represents human ignorance. Jean looks at that image and calls it a loving participation in the illusion of tragedy.
And Seth absolutely loves this framing. He seizes on it immediately, and he gives us the specific phrase that I think perfectly defines this entire deep dive. He calls for us to develop a holy irreverence.
Holy irreverence. We really need to spend a minute on this concept, because those two words do not normally belong in the same sentence.
No, they are complete opposites. Holy implies this immense respect, utter seriousness, sacredness, while irreverence implies mocking, joking, refusing to take things seriously at all.
So how can a person possibly be both at the same time?
It is the absolute perfect psychological balance for navigating a physical life.
Yeah.
Think about it. If you are too holy, if you take everything too seriously, you just get crushed by the illusion of tragedy. You become rigid with anxiety. You become terrified of the young Smiths of the world and the potential lawsuits. You become that Spanish monk who gets his entire flock wiped out because he's so grimly, fiercely ambitious about his holy mission.
But on the flip side, if you are too irreverent,
then you just become the jackrabbit. You become the complete nihilist. You think literally nothing matters, so you treat other people like dirt because they're just illusions anyway. You completely detach and just float away into the ether without learning anything.
So holy irreverence means playing the video game with full, genuine passion, while always quietly knowing in the back of your mind that it's just a game.
Exactly. You still cry real tears at the funeral, but a deep part of you knows that death is ultimately an illusion. You strive incredibly hard to build the utopian school, but a part of you rests in the knowledge that the school already exists in the spacious present. You play your assigned role with all your heart, but you never forget that you are actually a massive, multidimensional soul who is just having a temporary Saturday night experience in Elmira.
Yeah, it is profoundly beautiful. Play it reverently, Seth says. You had better play it reverently.
And then the conversation reaches its absolute soaring peak. Seth actually tries to put a name to the fundamental energy that makes this holy irreverence possible, the ultimate fuel of the universe.
And he really struggles to find the word. He complains that human words are just blunt instruments. But he finally throws out a term. Very weird, very alien-sounding term. Ignapthio.
Ignaptha, spelled I-G-N-A-P-T-H-A.
It sounds like a bad sci-fi planet from an old comic book. Why does he use such a bizarre, made-up word?
Because all of our existing human words carry too much heavy baggage. If he had just said God, people instantly picture a judgmental old man with a white beard sitting on a cloud. If he said energy, people just think of electricity running through a wire. He is desperately trying to describe this conscious force of pure vitality that intelligently connects every single thing in existence.
But eventually he realizes the word is too clunky and he relents. He admits Ignaptha is a poor approximation, and he finally says, you should indeed call it love.
Love. But not greeting card love, not fragile romantic love. He means love as the literal physics-binding force of consciousness, the invisible gravity that holds the jazz band together without ever locking the musicians into a rigid crossword puzzle.
Wow. So just to recap the ground we have covered here. We have gone from Meher Baba's honest deception to the crossword puzzle analogy, to the mind-bending spacious present, to the spooky psychic detective work with Smith, to the jackrabbit critique of LSD, to the African tragedy of the Spanish monk, to the philosophy of holy irreverence, and finally culminating in Ignaptha, the universal force of love. That is a massive, exhausting journey for one evening.
It truly is. It is cosmic. It is as profound as philosophy gets.
And honestly, this next part is exactly why I absolutely love the Seth Material, because right after all of that, right after reaching the absolute dizzying heights of Ignaptha and universal love, physical reality comes crashing right back into the room.
We definitely have to talk about segment 7, the shopping list.
Yes. So in the source material provided for this deep dive, there is a physical image included from the very next recording, session 304. It is a scan of an old envelope, and on the back of it, there is a scribbled handwritten list.
And what exactly is on this profound list? Is it a step-by-step guide to achieve instant enlightenment, instructions on how to open your third eye?
No. It is literally a hardware store list.
Yeah.
It says 150-watt bulb, needed erasers, spray fix, plastic wood, small tacks. And there is a little reminder note to go to the Elmira Paint Center and pay a bill for 60 cents.
It is the absolute perfect, grounded punchline to the entire cosmic joke we were just talking about.
It really is. It grounds us so completely. It is like the universe is saying, yes, you are an immortal, multidimensional soul traveling effortlessly through the spacious present. Yes, you are made of the pure love of Ignaptha. But guess what? The lamp in the living room is burnt out. You still need to go buy a light bulb.
It perfectly illustrates Seth's entire point about holy irreverence. The act of driving to the store and buying the light bulb is the spiritual act. Dealing with the messy plastic wood and the small tacks, that is the game you came here to play. You cannot just live up in the clouds with the jackrabbits. You still have to walk your physical body into the Elmira Paint Center and hand the cashier your 60 cents.
We are grand, multidimensional beings who still desperately need office supplies.
Precisely. The spiritual realm and the physical realm are not actually separate things. The scribbled shopping list is just as holy and relevant as the bronze statue of Shiva.
I really love that. That is such a comforting thought. I can actually feel holy while I am just wandering the aisles buying groceries.
You absolutely should.
So as we start to wrap up this incredible deep dive into session 303, let's try to synthesize all of this chaos.
Yeah.
What is the main actionable takeaway for the listener who is maybe driving to work right now or folding their laundry?
I think the core unifying message of the entire session is about trust and timing. First, you need to deeply trust that you are vastly more than you currently think you are. You aren't just a tiny trapped puzzle piece. You're an active creator of the whole puzzle. Second, trust the mechanics of the spacious present, the things you are striving for, the dream career, the healthy relationship, the utopian school. If they are truly aligned with your soul, they already exist. You do not have to forcefully manipulate the world to make them happen. You just have to confidently walk toward them without panicking like a slowpoke.
And third, stay grounded. Watch out for the literal Smiths of the world And be very careful of jumping over chasms you don't understand.
Yeah.
Use your practical intuition.
Exactly. And fourth, above all else, play the game of life with holy irreverence. Do not take it all so seriously that you crack under the pressure, but do not treat it so lightly that you just float away and fail to learn the lessons.
And finally, remember Ignaptha. Remember that love is the underlying glue, holding the whole ridiculous illusion together.
It is the glue. It really is.
Listen, if this conversation sparked something in your brain today, if you felt even a little shiver of recognition while we were talking, I want you to know we barely even scratched the surface of this material. This was literally just one single evening session. There are hundreds and hundreds of them.
Absolutely. We always heavily encourage our listeners to go directly to the source material. Please do not just take our summarized interpretation as gospel. The Seth material is incredibly dense, it is rich, and it is genuinely life-changing when you read it yourself. You can find all these books, specifically the early sessions, Book 7, published through the New Awareness Network.
Yes, we highly recommend you go check them out online at sethcenter.com. The early sessions. Go support the dedicated publishers who work hard to keep this incredible material in print. It is an absolute treasure trove of wisdom.
It really is a treasure trove.
So here is my final provocative thought for you to carry into the rest of your week. We talked a lot today about the game. We talked about Shiva joyfully dancing on the dwarf of ignorance. We talked about the plastic wood and the light bulbs.
So here's the question you need to honestly ask yourself right now. If your current life is a complex game that you actually designed for yourself to play, are you currently playing it with holy irreverence?
Are you actually enjoying the difficult levels? Are you taking the time to explore the weird side quests?
Or are you just frantically mashing the controller buttons, desperately trying to skip to the final end screen, and completely missing the entire point of why your soul bought the game in the first place?
I want you to really think about that while you are out buying your light bulbs and groceries this week. Thank you so much for diving deep with us today.
It was a pleasure. See you out there in the spacious present.
Catch you all next time.